Hi and welcome to Hearthside. My name is Michelle. I'm the author of this blog, and I've been working on making more accessible copies of my blog entries by creating video versions of them. So glad Yule, or it was when I wrote this blog entry. Right now it's August, but this was January 17th, which was Yule of this past January 2022. And I was talking about celebrating Old Yule in modern winter tradition. So when I'm talking about Old Yule, what I mean is the actual lunar solar date, which I explained in a previous video, but I'll just briefly go over again. The lunar solar calendar puts the Yule moon, which is like the full moon, for the midwinter month as being usually in January, sometimes the beginning of December, sometimes the end of December, sometimes the beginning of February, in the modern Gregorian calendar. The lunar solar calendar works on fixed points, which are the solstices and equinoxes, and then also using the lunar calendar to determine time as well. So most of the important dates would have been either a full moon or a new moon within this cycle. The fixed points basically keep the moons from rotating because they're not the same length as solar days, or solar years, I should say. So if we didn't use a lunisolar calendar, we just used strictly a lunar calendar, then eventually Yule would end up being in August and then slowly back again into January. That's not practical because these are obviously seasonal celebrations that have to do with what's going on around us and the earth at that time. Alright, so I have been expanding my Yule traditions over the past few years, and the way I see it, Yule is not just the 3 days surrounding the midwinter moon, which I would call Old Yule, but a full season of 2 lunar months, roughly December and January. So if we're looking at the Gregorian calendar, if we want to look at it that way, we could see December as the Yule month and January as the midwinter month. I'm more familiar with reckoning my holidays using the lunar solar model, but I know that a lot of people aren't familiar with that, so just for ease of understanding, then I'm going to say December and January. And the way I see that looking, as there would be one large festival which would be on the full moon, or the 3 days surrounding the full moon on the midwinter month, which would be Old Yule. But there would also be other festivities and different things interspersed throughout the 2 lunar month period. What exactly that looked like historically, there's some guess that something like Mother's Night might have occurred, and different days for different things. We know approximately maybe when Hulda would appear, etc., etc. But we're all just sort of piecing that together from the lore, which doesn't have a lot, the sagas, what Christians observed of these holidays, what Muslims observed of these holidays, and then folk traditions that have survived in some form after the Christianization of the region. So it's pretty piecemeal, and at some point you have to say, okay, but how do we put this into the modern context? How do we make this season meaningful for us now? And that's what I've been kind of working on doing. I mentioned in my previous post and in my previous video that one of the things that I did was I was working on a Yule weight, which is similar to the sun weight, which the sun weight, you can find lots of information on it online. I believe I'm going to drop links in below the video if you want to learn more about sun weight. But it's basically every Thursday going up to the solstice. So I'm doing something similar for Yule weight, where it's every quarter or half moon, however I decide to do it on a particular year, up until the full moon, which is the old Yule moon. And you are focusing on like a specific aspect of that season for each candle that you light. This past year, I decided to focus on female deities who were related in some way to the winter or Yule season. So my own Yule weight, unlike the sun weight, which has, I believe, 6 candles, has 9 candles. And I didn't light one for each quarter moon like I had the previous year, because that meant that there was pretty much a rite every week. Instead, I had them on the half moons, but I also had one for the solstice this year, and I saved 3 for the Yule night, and those 3 represented the Norns. So basically, like, it's a rite, it's not like a full-blown ritual, but like there was something that I said with each of the lightings and offering, etc. And if you look on my blog, then you can see pictures of the really cool ice candle holders that I made this past year for this ritual, that I formed into the shape of a sun wheel. There's a picture, I believe, of the one that I did on the solstice day. Most of these rites I chose to do at night because it had to do with winter in the dark time, but the solstice day one I did at sunrise, as is my tradition every year to go out and greet Sol. So yeah, this is just like one way that I found to modernize my tradition. The other night that I had a candle for, which was not following the lunar cycle, which was Mother's Night, which I, in my personal tradition, see as the night before the solstice day. Some other people might choose Christmas Eve for that date, because that's what it says, I believe, in Bede. But I figure that's a Christianization, and it was more likely to be prior to the solstice night. Although it could have been some other time, because depending on how far north you are, there was no way of telling when the winter solstice was, because it was just dark for a whole month. So, whatever you choose to do, probably not going to be wrong, because same with me, I'm just making it up as I go along sometimes as well. So, talking about the Yule weight tradition, candle traditions are really common across faiths. You are probably familiar with Hanukkah to some extent, Advent, and there's quite a few other ones as well that I've seen. I can't remember all of them off the top of my head. And yeah, the way that I'm doing it is mostly following the lunar calendar, so in some ways I think that might be similar to Hanukkah, although I'm not super familiar with Hanukkah, so don't quote me on that. What I do find is interesting is following the lunar cycle, whether it's the quarter moon that I'm doing the rites on every quarter moon, or just half moon, so full and new moons. I become so much more aware of the lunar cycle, and like I can just like guess where it is, and I find myself relating things that happen in my life to those lunar days rather than solar days, which is really kind of cool. And just like I'm aware of the moon when it's up at during the day sometimes this time of year, and just sort of like what sort of things happen at different points in the lunar cycle. This year I wanted to focus especially on feminine forces, and connect with them more in my personal practice, not just within the rite, but in general. I saw myself creating these candles and forming them into a sun wheel to represent soul, because soul is, like, to me, very connected with the whole of the Yule season, not just solstice, but even the old Yule celebration is about the returning of the sun and that hope for the winter ending. So, like, there's many different ways you could do a Yule wait if you wanted to make this part of your practice. It doesn't have to be 9 candles. That was just a number that worked for me. But if you want to do it every quarter moon, then it's going to be going on for some time. And it becomes really busy, especially when you have family who want to do Christmas things as well, and that season can get pretty hectic. So if you want less candles, there's nothing wrong with that. Sun weight is 6. You could do 4, you could do 3, whatever works for you. And it doesn't have to be focused on female deities like I did. Like, you could have it to do with different themes that you see within the Yule months, or like you could do a meditation for each one. I know a lot of people do Yule meditations like once a week or something, just as a way of connecting that time of year. This is a hearth tradition. This isn't necessarily something you would do with your tribe. You can do it with your tribe if you want, but then it's whether or not you can get together enough to do it, unless you're going to do it online, which is possible too, of course. But yeah, I definitely see this as more of a hearth tradition, and for me, that's why it's like a rite and not a full ritual, is usually within my hearth. When I'm approaching the gods, it's more of a short rite. I spend more of my time in my hearth cult focusing on ancestors or the local Vatir. So yeah, that's pretty much what it is. It's a way to connect with your loved ones with your hearth and feel the warmth of the season despite all of the harshness of the winter, and just a way of keeping time when the dark time is going on. Something to keep you focused and not dwelling on all those thoughts that can come up with all the introspection that happens at this time of year. So focusing that in a way that is constructive for yourself. That is all for that one. So I suspect most people won't be watching this either until just before Yule or during Yule. So glad Yule again to you all, and I will see you next time.